you here. Thank you so much for joining us for the third session in our Social Impact Educators series. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers today and on a topic that I'm a lot less familiar with than in the past, so I'm learning a lot through this session. My name is Debbie Brock. I'm with Catalyst 2030. I taught for 20 years in the States, and Catalyst is a growing movement of social change innovators that was started at the World Economic Forum in 2020 and has just exploded since then. There's over 5,000 social entrepreneurs around the globe. It was founded by 90 social enterprises. A lot of Skoll, Schwab, Echoing Green, and Ashoka Fellows are part of our work. To get to know everyone before we kick off the session, we'd love for you to put in the chat your name and your organization, university. If you have a link to your LinkedIn profile, that's great as well. We just know that we end up having a wonderful event when we get to know everyone a little bit better. We understand the educators are multitasking. So if you're not able to join us on camera, we'd love you to, but we understand if you are unable to. But please do share in the chat who you are, where you're coming in from, and if there's something particular that you're excited about in today's session. We'd love to learn from you as well. So thank you for joining us. Alexis is here with coordinator, International Association of Agricultures. That sounds fascinating. We have Brother Jonas from the University of Tanzania out of Africa in Nairobi. Miriam's at the Paris School of Business. Sally Schuster is at Columbia. She just finished her master's in public administration. And I see many other names that I know and familiar with. So thank you for joining all of us today. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our first speaker. Let me introduce Lisa Hehenberger, the German pronunciation, a renowned expert on venture philanthropy and an advocate of impact investment. You'll see this and her enthusiasm in her presentation today. She works for the SEA Center for Social Impact, and she's an associate professor in management and strategy. Their impact in investing in social entrepreneurship initiative has been fantastic. So if you want to learn more, she has some great teaching tips as well. She's going to sneak in there and talk about her classroom experience as well. She's a member of the European Commission's expert group on social business and OECD's social impact investment expert as well. And she's really passionate again about impact investing. So I'm excited to learn from her. I do want to point out my favorite little note is that she was a PhD student for Johanna Mar. Am I correct? Back in the day when Johanna was young. So she is very close with Johanna Mar. So I thought that was a fun fact to join. Go ahead, Lisa. Thank you so much. You have the floor.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And indeed, yeah, I started my PhD with Johanna Meyer, which was obviously a wonderful way to start off my academic career. Before that, I was an investment banker. I show this a little bit to show sort of the evolution of where I started and where I'm at now, because it actually also helps and informs my research. Sorry, my research and my teaching. So I'm a finance. I was a finance professional, as a starting point, and then my PhD was about venture philanthropy, and then I started working for the organization that I was doing research about, which was the European Venture Philanthropy Association, which is now called Impact Europe, as head of research and policy, and then developed a lot of different tools and different practical reports that actually now are still informing my research. I also have been involved in a lot of different advisory work, both on the policy side, working with the European Commission, with the then G8 Task Force on Impact Investing, and lots of other organizations ranging from more nonprofit like WWF. I'm now on the board of the GSMA Foundation, which works on mobile for development. And I also collaborate with many different types of impact investing funds, including CREAS, Oryx Impact, Ruby Impact Ventures, which are more sort of private equity, venture capital type of entities. But I've also been advisor to BlackRock on impact investing. So that's really more on the public market side. And I draw on all of these different experiences in my teaching. So if I can continue, I thought I would talk now a little bit about the actual topic that I teach. So I always start with like looking at what are the challenges that we're trying to solve with these different tools. So in a way, social entrepreneurship is one of those tools, and then impact investing is really how you fund, those entrepreneurs that are developing solutions for, some of our big challenges like poverty, like climate change, etc. Next, please. And the other thing perhaps that I wanted to mention is that when we talk about enterprises with impact, here are a few examples from Spain. I'm based at a business school in Barcelona called ESADE, and it's always quite interesting for students as well to experience, some of the companies that were set up in the country where they're studying. ESADE is a very international business school, so we have students from all over the world who come here to study, and they always find it interesting to hear those examples. So a prominent example here on this slide, for example, is the company called Pache. So this was set up by Pache, who's the entrepreneur. He was confined in a wheelchair when he was 18, and he decided that he did not want to choose between a manual wheelchair and an electric one. He wanted to actually invent a sort of a hybrid version where he was able to attach an engine to a manual wheelchair, making it increasing his mobility. And then he was able to develop a company that was then selling those sort of attachments, and that is sort of an innovation that produces a lot of impact, but it's also a profitable business that is investable for funders, such as impact investors. And so actually, when I teach about these different business models, it sort of is a good step in the direction then of like, how do you fund those businesses? And that would be where I continue. And I also want to clarify sort of what is social impact. So that would be the next slide. And I always talk about that it's some sort of a change. Okay, so we're trying to understand a positive or negative change that is experienced by people or planet as a result of one or several activities. So I also go into sort of how do you measure that, and how do you really understand if a change has been achieved. So really trying to understand it as well from the perspective of the stakeholders, which, when you're a funder, you're kind of several steps away from that. Next slide, please. And we also want to understand how impact relates to sustainability and the sustainable development goals. And the way I see it is that we have these goals that are sometimes a little bit sort of far away. They are at the macro level, but when we talk about impact, it's really about the results of your activities. Like, how do we get to those goals? And it makes it much more actionable, what you can do as an organization to move in a direction of those goals that we should all agree on, that we are interested in achieving. And then we also sort of think about why social impact is important. So from the perspective of more a corporate setting, it's important to attract talent. Also, of course, customers are interested in these products and services. There's also an increasing pressure from regulation. And of course, this idea of investors that are interested in both impact and ESG. So they're seeking double materiality. I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. But it also leads to this idea that companies must be able to measure and manage their impact. So it's not just about saying, that they're interested in solving problems and actually having an positive impact on the environment and on society with their different activities, but actually also demonstrating that. So in my course, when I teach impact investing, I then try to also make sure that students understand the difference between impact and ESG. And the way I see it is that ESG is much more about sort of risk mitigation from an investor perspective. So it's about trying to make sure that the companies that you're investing in are sort of ticking the boxes in terms of policies related to environmental, social, and governance. It's more about their internal processes and making sure that, you know, they are complying with regulation and sometimes beyond that. And that could be about, you know, how they treat their waste in their different facilities, you know, how they treat their employees, if they have, you know, different sort of gender policies in place, etc. But many times from an investor perspective, that is about risk mitigation. And in some cases, it can be about value creation. So if you're identifying a company that is perhaps weak on certain of those ESG factors, and you're helping that company increase and improve on ESG, you can actually create value, both in terms of sort of value for society, but also financial value. Because if you can then show to investors that, you know, through these different investments over time, you are actually worth more, you know, as a company, that is a direction that you can be heading towards. But it's very different from an impact approach, where we're trying to contribute, you know, to solving a social and or environmental problem. So if you take the example of Paul Bach from Batec, he's really like, he was faced with a problem where he didn't have the mobility that he was seeking, and he then found a solution that he was then applying to himself, but also to others. So he was solving, you know, a complete social problem here. And of course, you know, when it comes to then impact investing, we want this impact to be intentional, meaning that it's something that is part of an impact investor strategy. It's additional. You're putting your money where others are not putting it, and you're potentially as well adding value to the companies that you're investing in, but you're also measuring and managing that impact. So when it comes to then the sort of spectrum of different types of investments, and we have traditional investing on the left-hand side and philanthropy on the other side, and ESG investing and impact investing are in between. And the focus of my course that I'm teaching is really on impact investing. So hopefully it's clear now the difference between ESG and impact. And within impact, we have then two different approaches. So one is what we call finance first impact investing, where you're maximizing a financial return, but you're also contributing to social and environmental solutions. And then you have impact first investing, where you're maximizing the impact, but you also are trying to achieve a financial return. And so the characteristics to kind of sum up in terms of impact investing is that you are making investments into companies, organizations, and funds with the intention to generate social and or environmental impact alongside a financial return. And then you have these kind of core characteristics of intentionality. You're seeking a financial return, and you're also measuring the impact. This is sort of taking different definitions from sources such as the Global Impact Investing Network and the G8, which is now called the GSG. And this is sort of the starting point of, you know, the courses that I'm teaching on impact investing. I also want to sort of clarify to students that this is not something that is, you know, just a niche market. I mean, it's growing exponentially, and we show here that just, you know, a decade ago it hardly existed, and now it's you know, over $1 trillion. I think that I have to update this with the latest report that came out a couple of weeks ago. But it's really an exponentially increasing market. So it's something that we need to take seriously. And we also then focus on the strategy. And actually, I'm going to now talk a little bit how I teach this. So what I do, I have two courses. The first, so this, I'm now talking about MBA students. And the first course I teach is on social entrepreneurship and impact investing. And the second course is called Impact Investing in Action. For the first course, I start with social entrepreneurship. I look at sort of what are the different business models that you can develop to actually have an impact on society, and at the same time have sort of different degrees of financial sustainability in your business model. So I'm not talking about pure NGOs. I'm always talking about companies that are somehow within the market economy, so they have a business model that generates revenues, and then some might be always dependent on external funding and never become like totally financially sustainable, but some are operating as sort of profit maximizing companies, and those tend to be the ones that are most interesting for financial first impact investors to invest in. And what I do then in the course is I also look at impact measurement and how that is important, both at the level of the impact enterprise and also at the level of the impact investor. And then also what I give them as an assignment, and I think this comes after this. No, it's fine. The theory of change is a tool that we then go through, both at the level of the social enterprise and at the level of the investor. So this is, I mean, probably some of you are familiar with this already, but it's basically a tool that helps you sort of link the activities of the social enterprise with the ultimate impact that you're trying to achieve. So usually the way you develop this is you start with a problem and you think about how can you actually achieve a change in that problem. So if it's access to education, how can you, so if the problem is lack of access to education, then you want to increase access to education. And how can you do that, through your different activities? So that could be, building a school, but it could also be perhaps sort of awareness programs where you're trying to encourage families to send their children to school, depending on where you're developing these activities. And then you have a way then of measuring your impact, first in a more simple way by just measuring the outputs, which is counting your activities, and then outcomes is more about change, so that becomes more difficult to measure. I'm not going to sort of go into the details of how you develop a theory of change, but this is a tool that I find is very helpful, both at the level of the certain enterprise and then also at the level of the impact investor. So here you can see that the impact investor will have its investment strategy including or connected to a theory of change, and then the social enterprise or the impact enterprise will then also have a theory of change and a business plan. And if you look at the impact that it's having, the social enterprise will have a direct impact on beneficiaries, whereas the impact investor will have direct impact on the social enterprise, and then a sort of indirect impact on beneficiaries. So you're trying to see how all of that fits together, and then ideally you should be able to also measure that. And so I go through all of these different tools with the students, and then we come to a sort of an exercise that they have, which is this one, which really works quite well. So what they do is they have to develop an impact investing strategy. So this is for my first course that I do for MBA students. I also teach this course in the master's programs here at ESADE, so it actually works as well for students who don't have work experience. And what I ask them to do is to think about a particular problem that could be a social or environmental problem that they want to address with the fund. They also need to look at things like the geographic focus of the fund, the financial return objectives, etc. They have to think about the size of the fund, and they have to have a proper team in place with track record, etc. So it has to be, they then have to develop a sort of a pitch document, pretending that they are the founders that are setting up this fund, and they pitch this new fund to potential investors. Okay, so they're trying to raise money for a new fund, and all the elements that they get from the course are feeding into this final presentation. And it actually helps me also see that they have really understood the exercise and all the different content. So they come to class on the last day of the course, and they present to practitioners that come to my class and act as jury members. I also wanted to mention that throughout the course, I have guest speakers all the time, and they come from my network that I have developed over the years, which is why, you know, I showed you that sort of evolution of, you know, how my career has developed, and that also has helped me build this network and different connections with impact funds that are, you know, willing to come to class and share their experience with my students. And so that's the first course, and, you know, happy to answer questions about that. The second course is about the investment process. So this one is called Impact Investing in Action. And what they do is, and I explain to them like how the investment process works, but I try to make it very practical. So in this course, we collaborate with an impact investing fund called MCE Social Capital. And what we do is really help the students understand how an impact investing fund would go through the investment process, starting with sort of impact investment strategy, that if they have taken my first course, they will know how to do that, to develop an impact investing strategy. But now for the second course, the strategy is a given. Okay, so they already know the strategy because that's based on MCE Social Capital. And based on this strategy, they now have to find companies to invest in. So the first part is about deal screening, where they kind of take the different types of companies and see if they fit within the investment strategy of MCE Social Capital. And then they go through the whole sort of process of due diligence and deal structuring. So we get to deal structuring in this course. We don't continue with investment management and exit and so forth. So if you go to the next slide, I can show you how we do that. So basically, we, you know, on the first day, we have an introduction to the course in impact investing. This, obviously, for the ones that have taken my other course, this is a little bit of repetition. But then we really very quickly dive into the actual case with MCE Social Capital, where we then have those companies that they have to choose between. Okay, so they work in teams, and they act as if they were sort of investment managers of MCE Social Capital. And then for each session, they have to do part of the investment process. And in the final, maybe I mentioned that it's quite fun when we do the due diligence, because then I work together with two other colleagues. So one person from MCE Social Capital comes to class. So she is usually representing like the CEO of the companies that the investment fund is thinking about investing in, because she has most information about the company. I usually act as like the chief impact officer, who's like the expert on impact measurement. And then I have a colleague, Guillermo Casasnovas, and he's usually the CFO. So he answers more questions about financials. And then we do a role play. And then the students have to prepare due diligence questions that we answer. And we pretend that we are then representing the company that they are doing due diligence about. And this informs then the report that they develop. And then they also have to think about deal structure in terms of like the financial part, and, you know, what kind of instruments should they be using? Like, how should they structure that depending on, you know, the different, you know, the needs basically of the company that they're investing in. I say invest, but this is actually a debt fund. So it's about preparing a loan. And then in the final session, they have to prepare a presentation to the investment committee with the results of the due diligence, and then propose a deal structure. So that in some cases they might say like, oh, we don't recommend now to go further because some things have come up in the due diligence that, you know, we just think are you know, too risky, or, you know, don't fit exactly with our strategy. And then they make a you know, proposal for, and then in some other cases, like they go forward and they have a proposed deal structure. And then we give them feedback throughout. So it's very practical, it's very hands-on. It works really well in with the MBAs because that's really what they want. I haven't tried this with master students yet, but we're actually developing a course this year for our new MSc in Sustainability Management, where I'm going to be collaborating and doing a similar thing with a sustainability-oriented impact investor based in Barcelona. So they're going to be here to help me, do the role that MC Social Capital plays in this course. I don't know how much time I have left, but I had a few more slides, just kind of more general about the research center that I set up. So at ESADE, we have a research center called ESADE Center for Social Impact, where we work on impact investing, entrepreneurship, and impact measurement and management. And what is interesting about the research center is that we do a lot of applied research and also academic research, but a lot of these, the reports that we develop are actually feeding into the teaching. So we make sure that we can use a lot of these different reports and case studies that we develop as well in the classroom. So it makes it very much practical, for the students, and also we have then very good connections with practitioners because we have helped them, with those different cases, and they have understood themselves the different practices better, and they feel like they want to give back as well. So this has been a very useful part of our activity. I also wanted to mention that, at ESADE as a business school, we have a lot of other activities that are kind of connected to impact and impact investing that are also helping. So different research groups, such as the one I set up, but also the Institute for Social Innovation, Entrepreneurship Institute, etc. We also have a career department, which is very helpful. So ESADE Careers, and they have now a specific unit that works on impact jobs. And that, I think, is the next slide. So some of the different activities that we do, so we teach these courses, but we also have what we call an impact community. So in the MBA, we launched something called a Social Impact Lab, where there's a specific track for students who are interested in social impact, where they have, apart from the courses, also master classes, like different workshops, etc. We also try then to connect them to practitioners and to jobs. So that's also where we work with careers. And yeah, I think I mentioned already teaching cases that we develop, etc. And then on the next slide, connected to careers, and what I wanted to say is that what I realized, when working with students, was that like one of the things that they really, of course, are interested in is finding a job. When they finalize their careers, their studies. So what we've done together with our career department is to develop a career guide where we look at like how can they best find a job, that has some sort of an impact, environmental or social. So these are kind of the different types of organizations where, we have established connections, but also looked at what are some of the skills and competences they need for those jobs. And this is just an example of one of our MBA students that kind of went through this. So she took my courses on social entrepreneurship and impact investing, but then also went through the Social Impact Lab, and also got help from our accelerated program to develop her own social enterprise. And so this is just sort of an example of, one of our students who, we think are, she's doing quite an impactful company right now. She was featured in Poets and Quants, etc. So that was quite nice to see. And yeah, I think this is also now just to say that what we're trying to do to wrap things up is to really integrate social impact into business education. And we are a Jesuit school. So we were set up by Jesuits. So we have this sort of idea of developing conscious, compassionate, committed, and competent business leaders. And this has also been very helpful for us sort of internally and institutionally to actually sell this idea of it's important to not just make money, but also, do something that is useful for society, with the courses and everything else that we do with students. So yes, thank you very much for listening, and happy to take questions.
Great. Miriam, you had, Sally, go ahead. You have the floor.
Go ahead. I was just gonna ask if we can do questions now. Are we doing the 2 panels? What works?
Do it now. We're gonna do it now.
Okay. Should I just jump ahead? Okay. Lisa, that was wonderful. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. As I said in the chat, I finished my MPA at Columbia. I was also teaching assistant for a class called Creating a Social Enterprise. Been working on the field. There's also a sustainable investing research initiative at Columbia that's very similar to the initiatives you showed. My question is maybe twofold. First part is teaching theory of change, because I think if you have done it in the past, the concept is easier to grasp, but people don't really understand how that connects to sort of the bigger approach and why that makes sense. And so if you're not in the field, or if you come from perhaps from like an MBA type of background, it's sort of less digestible. That's kind of the first part. And the second is you have this wealth of experience coming from investment banking. You did a PhD on like a similar area. In terms of sort of the quant and statistics and the measurement part, how much do you think that plays into sort of the success of, building a career in that social field? Because there's like people from all over the world and backgrounds and experiences and interests. And so just if you can vouch for, the quant skill set. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I think, first of all, the theory of change, I would say that it has been a very useful tool for me. It kind of, and I guess, at first they might be a bit skeptical, but they need to work through a few examples, and then it's helpful. And so what I like to do is then also invite practitioners to come to class who are using it. So for example, I do an exercise where they need to develop a theory of change of a social enterprise. And then the CEO of the social enterprise comes to class, and then they present their theory of change to him. And then he gives them feedback, and then he presents like what he's working on now. So they see like, okay, this is something that is actually used, that it's not just something that academics have invented and no one is using, because that's kind of a common criticism of MBA students, I think, of academics. So it's been helpful for me, and usually students that are a bit skeptical in the beginning, they say things like, oh, now you're going to talk about social, like fluffy stuff, and then they end up like, oh, it's actually quite concrete, you can measure it, you can split it into different concepts, and I also emphasize things like financial valuations are also subjective, so I guess that it helps me that I have been an investment banker, because then I bring that experience to the classroom, and I say, I remember when I had to do a financial valuation, and my boss said, okay, it should be between like 10 and 20 million. You have to just like work the numbers so that it comes out like that, and then you're like, okay, that's very scientific, right? So I think it's helpful for them to also put things into perspective, that not everything is somehow subjective. In terms of my finance background, I think it's been helpful for me, not so much maybe on the quantitative side, because my course is not a quantitative course. Like I focus much more on the impact side. And the finance part, I assume that they learn that in other courses, so they do courses on venture capital, on finance, etc., and then they kind of drill the numbers with them. So my course is much more focused on the impact side. That being said, some of the students that I had in my Impact Investing in Action course, they told me that they learned more finance in that course than in the finance course. So I think it also depends on like how you apply it and like what their interest is, because you might have someone who's really interested in impact investing, but they're not so into the finance. I think for MBA students who have no finance background to get into impact investing, it can be a problem, because they come in at a higher level, and if they have no investment experience, they might not get sort of, they might not get past the filters, you know, of headhunters and so forth. So that might be an issue. Although there are some other rules in impact investing that are not always like investment rules, you know, so even like on the impact measurement part, on like investor relations and so on, you know, you can still develop a career.
Mhm. I have one more question for Miriam, and then Eunice, if you could put your question in the chat, and we'll move it to the second half after Anne-Claire gets to present. But Miriam had asked about who are the organizations that are doing practices of impact investing nowadays?
They're doing what, sorry?
Which other organizations are doing impact investing now? What types of organizations?
Okay. So I mainly work with venture capital and private equity fund managers. I would say like that's the bulk of the types of organizations that are doing impact investing. Then you also have some foundations that have, you know, some impact investing activity. I think that's more common in the US than in Europe. We also have, you know, some impact investing through publicly listed assets or investing in publicly listed assets, like what I mentioned with BlackRock, but that's, I would say like out of the activity, I mean, out of the money, that's big money because, you know, they make big investments. But there are not that many actors yet, you know, in that space.
Thank you. And then the other questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to them either, at least we'll be able to see the chat and answer those, or we'll follow up with those. Moving on to Anne-Claire Pache. Anne-Claire is, it was funny, we were talking about the IMD conference and many of us actually attended the IMD conference, which was fantastic. I'll put the information in the chat. But Anne-Claire is a professor of social innovation at ESSEC Business School in Paris, France. She's a chairholder as well in social innovation. We have these social innovation experts here. She's Associate Dean of Strategy and Sustainability and also Associate Editor of the Journal of Organizational Design. So she is managing a lot of balls, and we're really thankful for her being here today. Her research focuses on the intersection of organizational theory and social innovation, with this particular emphasis in pluralistic environments, hybrid organizations, and scaling up processes of organizations. So she's also involved with nonprofit organizations and that pioneered youth civil service in France. So off to you, Anne-Claire. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Debbie. So happy to be here. And so happy also to go just after Lisa, because there's a lot in common in what we do, but also in our respective profiles. I have also joined academia later in my career after a professional commitment in real life organizations. On my side, it was being part of a social entrepreneurial initiative that led indeed in France to the introduction of youth service that has now gone to becoming a public policy in France. But so I worked quite a few years before realizing that I really wanted to teach social entrepreneurship, social innovation. And so I created this, what we call at ESSEC, this chair on social innovation, which could be the equivalent of a center. Then went on to do my PhD, which I did on focusing specifically on social enterprises, and which led me then to a few years later becoming this associate dean for strategy and sustainability, taking a bit in the way that also Lisa was presenting what happened with SAD, but this idea of taking these issues of social and environmental impact, which were a bit at the periphery of the school, ESSEC Business School, taking them to the center. So I won't tell you the whole story, but if you're interested, I'll be very happy to send more material or to go in more depth into what we've been doing at ESSEC. As we we're discussing with Lisa how to structure our two speeches, I thought since Lisa did a great job at really going deep into how to teach impact investing. I've been teaching impact investing. It's now been taught by my colleague Arthur Gauthier at ESSEC in blended format, combining online material that students engage with prior to joining the class. And then when they get to the class, they mainly discuss and work on specific cases, a bit in the same spirit as what Lisa was describing in her second class. I'm also teaching strategy for social innovation class, where 1 or 2 sessions are organized around impact investing. And I'll discuss at the end of my presentation one teaching case that I've been developing around social impact investing that is available in case you would be looking out for teaching material to teach impact investing. But so since Lisa did such a great job at articulating how to teach impact investing, I thought I would share with you a bit of the research that I've been conducting on that topic. That is, material that can be used, of course, in the context of teaching. The way that I've been researching impact investing is by looking at it as a hybrid practice that combines elements of finance and elements of philanthropy. It does combine, this notion, and so great to go after Lisa because she defined impact investing in a very, clear and crisp way. But so impact investing combines, financial return, that is the one of the key dimension of financial investing, and is also aiming at producing, social or environmental impact that is the bedrock for philanthropy. And so impact investing is really at the intersection of both finance and philanthropy. The research project that we did with my colleague Arthur Gauthier and Philippe Santos at Católica in Portugal tried to answer the puzzle that is presented in the next slide, which is that Lisa focused a lot on describing the process that goes into the practice of investment. What we decided to focus on in this research project was understanding who would be those ready to mobilize funds, investments in these impact investing funds. And we were surprised as we started exploring, so who is willing to put money into impact investing, that there were very different responses. Here you have 2 examples of 2 high net worth individuals whom we interviewed and whom we asked, are you interested in impact investing, and would you be willing to put some of your wealth into impact investing funds? And so one guy, this Duncan, said, my approach is rather binary. There is the business world, you meet a demand, you sell products and make a profit to survive and thrive. And then there is philanthropy, a world where the demand is not solvent, where no business model is possible. And he responded, I struggle to imagine something in the middle. So, in a nutshell, what he was saying is that I don't really understand and believe in impact investing. When this other guy, Zach, another high net worth individual, said, I fully engaged in impact investing because I finally found consistency. If I practice impact investing, all my activity is logical, consistent, and creates double value. I cannot tell myself on the one hand, I do very positive things, and on the other one, anything goes. For me, it's impossible. And so as we were, discovering the fact that you take 2 individuals and, they have money that they could use to have social impact, some say impact investing is a good approach, and others say, I don't believe in it, and I believe we need to keep on doing finance on the one hand and philanthropy on the other. And so the research question that is presented on the next slide, really articulates, the puzzle that we entered the field with. Why is it that some high net worth individuals embrace impact investing while others reject it and rather compartmentalize their investment on the one hand and their giving on the other. And so to address this question, we conducted, and we can show the next slide, we conducted a comparative case study where we interviewed 14 high net worth individuals in France, all interested in this notion of, I want to have social impact. All had been exposed to impact investing. And so we interviewed these people over time for 3 waves of in-depth life story interviews to understand how did they engage with and respond to this idea of, putting their money into an impact investment fund that would then do the work that Lisa has been describing. And we find quite interesting things. We found quite interesting things. Next slide, please. We found that, so this is the sample, the 14 high net worth individuals that we interviewed, a combination of, male and female, a combination of, older and younger individuals with a range of professional activities, a range of types of wealth, some wealth having been inherited from, their ancestors, while others were, had been creating their own wealth through entrepreneurship or through working in the field of finance. What we found is that we have a range of different responses across these different individuals when it came to feeling like impact investing was a good practice for them to engage with. We can move to the next slide, where I will start showing some of the findings. What we found, and that was interesting, is that all these individuals that we interviewed went through the same sense-making process when they were exposed to impact investing. First, they had to understand what impact investing was about, and somehow we call this noticing the cues, but it's really, okay, I understand what this practice is about, and I'm able then to formulate a judgment as to whether I believe that it's a good or a bad practice that I want to engage with or not engage with. So all went through that first phase. Okay, it makes sense. I understand. It's partly philanthropy, partly finance. It makes sense. And then they created interpretation, either positive or negative, depending on a few factors that I will describe a bit later. And then they took action. They decided, okay, I believe this is an interesting practice that I want to put my money into, or they rejected the practice, believing that even if their goal was to contribute to social impact, they felt like it would be better to do it by investing their money in pure financial instruments and then put some of their money into pure philanthropic activities. And so this research project was really about why is it that some answered in a way and others answered in another way. We really wanted to understand what was the process through which they went through to formulate these responses. So next slide shows that we identified that there was one key factor that was at play here, which was how did these individuals relate to the logic of finance and the logic of philanthropy that impact investing blends. The question was really, were they fully novice about these practices? So they knew little about philanthropy, they knew little about finance. Were they familiar? So they knew a little bit, but not too much. Or were they fully identified? We had, for instance, a range of individuals in our sample who were professional investors. So they had either created or worked for their whole life in venture capital firms, for instance. And so their identity, their professional practice was very much associated with understanding everything about finance and really, being attached to its core tenets. Next slide, please, shows the first step. The first step, which is this idea of when such an individual was, discovering impact investing, what we found is that those that are really, novice with finance or with philanthropy were not able to understand impact investing, and they were not even able to say, I think it's good or I think it's bad. They were just lost, and they didn't, really understand what it was about. We have Monique, for instance. She said several times, so she inherited her wealth. She worked in the field, in the medical sector. And so she said, several times I was asked to invest in ventures, but I'm not an investor. I really don't care about that, and I don't know how to do it. I'm happy to rely on my bank to manage my assets. So I found impact investing very confusing. So if you don't understand finance, or if you don't understand philanthropy, very difficult to make sense of that practice that is a hybrid between the two. So that led Monique to say, I'm not even considering it. I'm just, going my way and not paying attention to this practice of impact investing. Next slide, we see that when, all those that were able to reach the second stage of, creating their interpretation, they used comparisons. So, impact investing was this weird new hybrid practice combining finance and philanthropy. And so they started to decide whether they found it, good or not good. They created comparisons. And so some of them compared impact investing to financial investments. Others compared impact investing with philanthropic gifts. That the choice to go for one or the other comparison was often driven by the way in which impact investing had been introduced to them. For instance, some of them had discovered impact investing in a conference organized by their bank that was, telling them about impact investing as another tool that they could use to manage their assets. So that was really leading them to say, okay, so that's an asset management tool. So I'm going to compare impact investing with traditional investments, and I'm going to formulate my assessment in comparison to finance. In contrast, others had been introduced to impact investing by some of their friends who told them, I found this great way to have more impact. It's not philanthropy, it's impact investing. You should look into it. It's a great way to have impact. In that case, then, these individuals would be tempted to compare impact investing with philanthropy. And so as they were doing this comparison, what we found, and that's shown in the next slide, is that what then matters in an important way is the extent, the slide before, please. Yes. When they, for instance, compared impact investing with pure investments, with finance, what we found is that what really mattered was how these individuals related with the finance logic. If they were very identified with finance, for instance, if they were professional investors themselves, and if they were introduced to impact investing as an interesting way to manage investments, then they would say, no, this is not appropriate, because this is not true finance. I know what true finance is. And so impact investing, this way of, generating financial return, but not a lot, that doesn't make sense. That really, conflicts with my vision, my understanding of how I understand and I value finance. And so these individuals would then decide to reject impact investing and say, no, impact investing is no good. I'm going to keep doing finance on the one hand and philanthropy on the other. Those who were familiar with finance, they knew, about finance, and they knew overall how investments worked, without being deeply identified as someone who really knows everything, understands everything about finance. Those were more ready to consider impact investing as appropriate. And some of them in our sample, 5 of these individuals said, okay, I'm introduced as impact investing as a way to manage my assets. I understand finance, but it's a good way to do, a nice way to manage my investments that also has impact. I like this idea and I'm going to go for it. We can move to the next slide. We have here one example where, Duncan, who was professionally a private equity fund manager, very identified with finance. And he said, when asked about his assessment of impact investing, it may be due to my investor's background, but I have trouble understanding impact investing. I don't understand this idea of earning money, but not too much. I don't know what type of financial return we're talking about here. So for him, this idea of, blended return was too far away from his deep understanding of finance. And he said, this is no good. I'm going to keep on compartmentalize my activities. In contrast, and what we see on the next slide is that those who compared investing with giving or with philanthropy, because this is how they had been introduced to impact investing as, a more modern way to practice philanthropy. Again, what we found is that those who were deeply identified with philanthropy, especially through their, religious beliefs I have to mention that, mainly Catholics in our sample. For them, this idea of, getting some financial return on this idea of creating positive social impact was difficult to accept, because for them it was somehow, clashing with what their idea was of pure philanthropy. And so in the same way, those identified with philanthropy rejected impact investing as being not appropriate, when those that were familiar with philanthropy but not deeply identified with that practice were ready to believe that, okay, impact investing is appropriate and it may be worth adopting it. If we move to the next slide, we have another example of, Gary, who was, a manager in a consulting firm, deeply identified with philanthropy because of his, deep religious background, deep religious beliefs. He said, giving is giving. Getting paid for a gift, well, this is doubtful. I think that commitment and generosity are very important things, and I find it ethical to keep them strong and pure. I'm afraid that investing, even when expecting a lower financial return, leads naturally to investing where it is the most profitable, hence, challenging the very notion of social impact. And so in summary, next slide shows the overall, findings, is that, what we found is that impact investing is more likely to be embraced by those that are familiar with finance and philanthropy, rather than those who are identified with that practice. They have enough understanding of finance and philanthropy if we compare them to the novices, but they're not attached to them as those that are identified with these practices are. And so in summary, if we move to the next slide, the key takeaways that you may also use in your own teaching is that the adoption of impact investing, and here I'm talking about the investor side, where the money for impact investing comes from, really depends on how the practice is presented to them if it's presented as an alternative to finance or if it's presented as an alternative to philanthropy, because that will lead them to different types of comparisons and then ultimately different types of assessments. And then, the assessment, what we find is, usually negative when it is made that by people who are strongly identified with one of the two components of that hybrid practice, because to them, this notion of mixing things is weird. They're too attached to one or the other. In contrast, people who know enough, but not too much, are those we found that are the most likely to adopt the practice. And so what it means is that, depending on who you're going to talk to, for instance, if you're going to talk to investors, to people who have money, but who are identified professionally to, the world of finance, you're more likely to attract them to impact investing if you present impact investing as a nice, a modern way to practice philanthropy, rather than by trying to induce them into, this is the future of finance, because they may be reluctant to see it in this way. In contrast, if you're talking to a community of people who are strongly identified with philanthropy, or as we found, individuals who are deeply committed to philanthropy because of their religious beliefs, then it may be easier to induce them to explore practicing impact investing if you introduce that practice as an alternative to finance. In other words, really, depending on who you want to talk to and what you want to achieve, you may need to think strategically about how to sell this impact investing practice to different potential investors. So this is what our research was about. And then maybe just, very briefly as a closing theme, I wanted to share with you the fact that we developed with colleagues this teaching case on impact investing called Investir plus and Simplon, a deep dive into impact investing. On the next slide, I articulate the way in which you could use that case. It's a case that is made of case A and case B. Next slide, please. Case A is about, discovering. So the case is about an impact investment fund called Investir plus that meets Simplon, a potential investee. Simplon is a social enterprise working on youth training on coding, on IT. A very interesting social enterprise. And so Investir plus is thinking about, should I invest in Simplon or not? And so case A is about discovering the strengths and weaknesses of Simplon and discussing, should I invest in Simplon? Should Investir plus invest in Simplon or not? And then case B describes how Investir plus decided to invest in Simplon, and follows these investments over a few years, and then asks, should we invest more in Simplon at a subsequent funding round, or should I exit? And the way in which I teach this class usually is by getting students to work in teams and to somehow model the work done by the investment committee, asking them, do the work of an investment committee. There's a lot of data in the case, and decide whether or not to invest, and then decide in the next round whether or not to add more funding or to exit. The case works really great, and so if you're interested, I'm very happy to share it with you. It exists in both French and English. I'll stop here, but I'm very happy to take any question you may have.
Great. I absolutely love this. So interesting. I wanted to see if anybody had any questions directly for Anne Claire first, before we move on to just asking both of the panelists. But I will move on if nobody wants to share their direct question. And I do want to bring up this question that Eunice had asked, and Lisa added some insights, but I think it's important for us to share verbally as well, is that people are looking for the early stage social entrepreneurs, of course, want to see, oh, somebody give me impact investing. But realistically, that's not going to happen because impact investing is newer. And so they're going to go for more established social ventures with more of an impact track record with them as well. So like you just said, made this comment about how social entrepreneurs going through impact investing process have two challenges: that relatively short-term expectations as compared to the long-term, impact, social issues addressed, education access, poverty, etc. The market rate of return expectations of investors kind of proves this as well, and that Jen slide was in there as well. So what do you suggest to improve the mechanisms to assess and align better the social entrepreneurs with impact investors? And Anne Claire, it could be you or Lisa.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Claire.
Go ahead.
Lisa, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think it's interesting, because sometimes some impact investors complain about the lack of deal flow. They say there are not enough deals to invest in. I mean, sometimes that could be a problem with their investment strategy. I mean, so it's one of the things that I actually have students work on when they're developing an investment strategy, to make sure that that there actually are investable companies that kind of fit their investment strategy. But so that's more from the perspective of the investor. And so what I think, like in the strategy, you have to make sure that if you're going deep on a topic, so if you're like focusing on a specific social problem, let's say mental health, there might not be enough investable companies on mental health in a small region. So you might need to do like a European-wide approach, or have a bigger region to focus on, with the difficulties then of maybe not having, so you need to have people all over that region, so that they can be close to the companies that they invest in, and be sort of hands-on as an investor. So that's from the investor perspective. And then I guess the problem here is also that the sort of people with the types of investors, so the institutional investors that have like big money, they tend to invest in more traditional investment strategies that are run by fund managers with track record, etc. So the big money is going to those fund managers that perhaps are not the most, are the ones taking the most risk, the ones not investing in more early stage companies, etc. So that is an issue. And they also sort of are forcing, in a way, the impact investors to go for market rate returns, and they have this pressure then to deliver financial return. And then from the perspective more on the social enterprises, yes, I think like early stage, it's more difficult, but then you also have maybe a little bit more flexibility. You can also get grant funding, you can get government funding. I mean, depending on where you're located, you can also get funding from foundations and so forth. But yeah, definitely foundations are, at least in Europe, are not really doing much impact investing yet. So that would be one thing, like to get foundations to do more of that, and also these kind of blended structures that I mentioned in my response. Sometimes you can have then sort of government funding or like more philanthropic funding coming in the same deal, and de-risking other funders, so that in this way you're like mobilizing more capital to otherwise too risky investments.
Great. And Claire?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just going to mention that things probably vary also by country these days, where the maturity of the field is, evolving and maybe different across countries. So if I, take the example of France, a few 10 years ago, this impact investing sector was really emerging. There were few actors. The few actors were very, on the one hand, they were risk averse, and they were also, struggling to find the right deal flow. Now, there are more actors. There's, some of them are, more willing to, work with younger and more, early stage actors, where, others more structured, more institutional are, investing larger sums of money, but with more advanced players. So I guess, it's difficult to answer that specific question, irrespective of the context, because we see some variation in the way in which these ecosystems are building up. And, we've seen definitely, and, thanks to the work that Lisa did when she was, part of the EVPA, now Impact Europe, and these professional organizations, we see a growing, maturity in the field, where it's becoming easier, I would believe, for earlier stage actors to come in. Yet there's always this notion of, impact investment funds. They want to be able to assess both the potential financial return, but also the potential social or environmental impact, and that requires, some maturity of the investee to be able to assess to what extent. So this notion of, a proof of concept and some evidence of impact is an important dimension to take into account.
So true. You just go ahead. You have a follow-up? You can unmute. Eunice, as you're trying to figure out,
sorry.
there you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wonderful answers. I'm a social entrepreneur. That's why I'm asking more practical questions rather than teaching side. But this question is more about teaching. What I feel is the current programs are designed more on the idea of growth philosophy of the current investment system. But we know that the problems caused by the current world is exactly coming from this growth philosophy. They want to grow more, they want to get more, they're creating lots of problems, issues, etc., etc. And I always think, especially Lisa and Claire, that we have to play with our philosophy of teaching in the direction of creating more sustainable companies, like with a slower growth, with a responsible production, with an idea of not extracting money from the system and putting additional investments through. And if you probably follow as well, but there are lots of not mainstream, but new economies coming through, like degrowth, donuts, post-growth, etc., which they argue that the current growth system is broken and the major problem. And what I feel is we are continuing to reproduce the current paradigm through our teaching methodologies. What do you think about that one?
Well, I can start. That's a tough one. I think that's a fundamental yet, tough question. If I take the example of ESSEC, we just introduced, and I'll be, teaching in that class, an elective on, post-growth. So at least, being ready to challenge some of the fundamental assumption of, the capitalist system. And we have a range of professors from the economics department, the marketing department, the finance department, no, not the finance department, actually, the management department, the law and public policy department. So we assembled a pool, the accounting and control, we assembled a pool of professors from all these different disciplines to discuss this notion of, can we go beyond the supremacy of, growth and shareholder value maximization and, reinvent a way to view, our economic models. I cannot, tell you that this is going to impact all the students in the school and that, it will fundamentally change the way in which economics or finance are taught in the school, but at least it creates a space where a conversation can happen. First, between, I would say, it's the first step is offering this content to students, but it's also creating a platform for professors. So there's like 7 or 8 professors teaching in that class that will be, discussing these ideas and potentially, transferring these conversations into their own departments. So, it's a way in which we decided to do it here at ESSEC. But I think this is a fundamental question. In a way, if we stick to this notion of impact investing, I think this notion of maximizing impact in the way that we've been for long thinking about how to maximize financial return is good. So growing impact in a way and keeping that same focus on growth for impact is important, but how do you challenge more profoundly the some of the core assumptions of capitalism, I think is much more difficult and fundamental and goes way beyond teaching impact investing as a class.
Thank you so much. I just looked, I was taking notes and looked at my phone and said, oh my, we're already over on time. We'd like to launch a poll real quickly. We'd love to get feedback from you about the session, and we'd like to showcase that information, and we'll follow up in an email as well with that information. You don't have to share the slides, Comey, but also know there is an online knowledge resource called Social Change Innovators. If you want to access information about impact investing, social entrepreneurship, systems change, all of these topics, and it was originally designed for educators, so you can share that with your colleagues as well, and it's in the chat message as well, the website link, and we will share all this information with you, but in true Catalyst fashion, we'd love for you to end with unmuting yourselves and saying goodbye to Anne Claire and Lisa and thanking them for the wonderful session in your native language, if you'd like. Thank you.
Au revoir.
Merci,
so much.
gracias.
Merci, au revoir.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Gracias.
Hoşçakalın.
Hoşça kal Yunus.
Hoşçakal.
Turkish.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.